Just let me know, Gary. Let me know, Gary.
Yep. You are up.
All right. Good evening. Welcome to what I think is the 12th annual college panel night that Sarah and I have hosted here at CVU. The one nice thing about virtual is it doesn't matter if we have a cold day, an ice day, a snow day. We've had a smoke day here at CVU. It doesn't matter. We can still have this night, which is great. We're hoping that we can present some student voice to everybody through a couple of videos that we recorded. And then we have a list of questions that we're going to ask our reps from the various schools. And then we will end the night with a little bit more, we'll hear a little bit more from students. And then the schools all have breakout sessions. So if you are live and on the YouTube feed and you want to join one of the reps and ask them some school specific questions or ask them some questions about yourself, the application process, they will be available for, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes, perhaps longer if there's a lot of presence. And then they will sign off and the YouTube stream will actually be available, I guess, in perpetuity. I searched last year's link and found last year's link. So all of this information will be there for you to access even after tonight. So if you want to catch up on something that Moses from UVM said about their process, it's all there. It's all there for you. So before we continue, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Russ Aceto. I'm the Fairbanks House Counselor. And I'm going to turn it over to Sarah O'Hare Hughes, who is the Chittenden House Counselor, for a second.
Hi, everyone. Hi, students. Hi, families. I'm Sarah O'Hare Hughes. I like Russ said, I'm one of the Chittenden House Counselors. I'm happy to be part of this evening, and I'm hoping many of you can have a chance to view this this evening or view it after it's at a later time. I want to make sure we introduce each of our panelists. We have different reps who are representing different colleges, and I'm going to just let them take some time to just briefly just say who they are and what college they are coming from. So maybe we'll start with Sam.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for having me. My name is Sam Prouty, and I am Director of Admissions at Middlebury College.
All right. And Diane?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Diane Saboski, and I am the Director of Admissions at Champlain College.
And Kirsten?
Hi, everybody. My name is Kirsten Larrabee, and I am an Assistant Director of Admissions at St. Lawrence University.
And Bernita?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Bernita Weller, and I am one of the Assistant Directors of Admission at St. Michael's College.
Awesome. And Moses?
Hello, everyone. My name is Moses Murphy, Director of Undergraduate Admissions at the University of Vermont.
And Brandon?
Hi, everyone. I'm Brandon Kennedy. I'm one of the Associate Directors of Admission at Castleton University.
Excellent. All right. I think we can get started.
All right, Gary, if you want to play the video.
As well as 3 UC schools, which is just 1 application. So technically only 4 applications, and I plan to apply to 3 more schools is my plan right now. And I already did get into the new school So I may just pursue that instead of going down the road of applying more, but my plan right now is to apply to 3 more.
I've applied to Northeastern University, University of Pittsburgh, and Loyola University in Chicago so far. And I plan on applying to George Washington University, Drexel University, Clark University, and then I may add another one.
I applied to 5 schools early action for November 1st, and then I'm planning to apply to in total 8 to 10, so probably 3 to 5 more schools for regular decision.
How did you decide which schools to apply to? And how did you decide which schools to apply to early versus regular?
I kind of tried to figure out what I was interested in and what criteria I needed versus just wanted. And I did a lot of research through Naviance, through Niche, asking people I knew, asking other kids who I knew applying to schools. And I really just tried to compile a list. And then from there, I did more research and tried to narrow it down. And eventually I was able to visit a few schools, and that was a big factor for me as well.
All of the schools I applied to are in major cities. And I did that because I grew up in a city and I lived in Vermont for the past few years, and I really, really miss living in an urban environment. And so that was sort of the first thing I went to when looking at schools to apply to. I just looked at the major cities first because that's so important to me.
Well, how I chose schools I wanted to apply to, I first was looking at location. That was a big thing for me. Ruled out a lot of schools. Also size. I wanted to go to a large school. Also ruled out a bunch of schools. I did look at acceptance rates a little bit. Finance in general is also a large part. So I looked for schools that provide a lot of merit aid, and I also did look for honors colleges.
How did you do that research? Did you do that with your school counselor? Did you do that on your own? Did you use specific platforms like Naviance or Niche or something different?
I use Niche a lot. I did a lot of research by myself. I really, really like Niche as a resource, but then also just like Google, you can just Google, schools in New York City or, whatever state or city or whatever you would like, and they'll give you a whole list, and then you can go from there. Naviance is a really good resource to get like facts, I feel, where it just says exactly the acceptance rate, what kind of students have been admitted from CVU. I found that really helpful. But yeah, otherwise just personal research, a lot of watching videos that were student made, reading reviews, and then also webinars from the schools. I've attended so many of those from so many different schools, many, many more than ended up on my final list.
Have you visited schools yet? And what are you specifically looking for? What are some of the things you're looking for in your visits?
I have actually not visited any schools so far. And I actually didn't visit for 3 reasons. 1, COVID. 2, a large reason was the distance. A lot of the schools I'm applying to span down the East Coast and out west. And time, I just didn't really have the time to visit. But I do plan on visiting UVM in the next month. And once I get my acceptances, I will choose, once I get kind of to the top, maybe 2 or 3 schools, I will then visit those schools.
It's even much easier to find facts online and statistics rather than actual experience, like honest experience. So going forward, after those 2 schools, when I visited other schools, I really paid attention to the personal experiences of my tour guides and how they felt they were able to fit in, so that I could kind of relate and say, oh, that seems like me, that's how I would fit in, or that doesn't seem like me, I don't think I would fit in. And that's kind of what I was going off of.
So I'm assuming I'm back live. I have to comment. Notice the really ugly Christmas sweater shirt thing that I was wearing, and the super Joe Cool hang the mask off of one ear, like not realizing this was going to be broadcast and I was going to be a YouTube star someday. perhaps what not to do when you're making a video that everybody's going to see. So then, speaking of campus visits, and I think if a couple of you want to answer this, I think it's very timely. I think it's one of those things that I may ask the question and you will shrug your shoulders and say, meh. But campus visits, what do they currently look like, and what do you suggest students and families do moving forward? If nobody turns their mic on, I'm going to call on somebody.
Okay, I can.
Okay.
Now we're all
That's
going.
funny. I know. I acquiesce to you all.
So I think it depends on the school, right? So what I would say is check and look at those first and foremost for all of us. But many of us have been open this entire year and are open. At Champlain College, we've been giving tours for the past few weeks. We're back from break. We're doing tours. We're doing information sessions. We're moving forward with our open houses in February, March, and April. So we've been very successful being able to host events and be able to have people on campus. There will be different regulations at different schools, and obviously you have to adhere to those, and we're doing our best for social distancing and masking. And you can always ask about those safety protocols if you're nervous. But I wouldn't hesitate to reach out to colleges and say, this is what I'd like to see on campus. Is that possible right now? Because a lot of us are doing what we can safely within our community to get you on campus.
Anybody have anything else they want to add?
So St. Michael's is also up and running in terms of tours. Our students are not back on campus until the 17th, but the admissions office is always ready and willing and anxious to give tours and info sessions and answer questions. So simply registering for those, someone would be happy to come and give a tour of campus and talk about what the school is offering and just all the new plans that are being set in motion for us in the fall of 2022. So absolutely, come on down. We'd love to show you around for sure.
Cool. What is the most important factor in a student's application? It's a hard conversation to have in our offices, and it would be really great to have kind of straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak, in terms of what you guys believe are the most important factors.
Russ, I would jump in there and look to my colleagues to supplement anything they feel I'm leaving out. I think that all of us are going to take a holistic approach to considering a student's candidacy for admission, which is to say, we're going to look at all the different aspects that a student submits as part of their application and use that to determine, fit, academic fit, personal fit with major. That being said, for UVM, certainly the academic preparedness of a student is going to be key. And so within that, we're looking at not only a student's grades and their GPA, but of course the rigor of the coursework that they have selected throughout high school, and maybe more specifically how that coursework and that rigor aligns with their intended major. So in addition to that, of course, letters of recommendation, essays for students who choose to submit test scores, which of course, I think all of us at this point are still test optional. That can be a factor. Letters of recommendation, extracurricular activities, those are all things that weigh in on our decision. But at the core for us, of course, it is the academics and the preparedness of students, recognizing that the first threshold is understanding whether or not a student is capable of success academically based on the information we have available to us. Knowing that we have more capable students in our pool than we have room for, there's sort of the secondary threshold of competitiveness within the applicant pool. And so I think that's where we spend a lot of time is trying to determine of those students who have demonstrated that they are capable of being successful, who are the students who are going to be most successful and who are most competitive while meeting the enrollment goals of the institution.
I would strongly second everything that my friend Moses said, and then just add, we're not in the business of admitting a particular GPA, right? We are admitting somebody who is going to be a teammate and a roommate and a classmate and somebody who's doing research in the labs and somebody who's going to participate in a class discussion in history, right? And so anything that we can do to get a sense really of just who you are and what makes you tick, and, how you are you. I mean, I joke at Middlebury, we have a large percentage of graduates who wind up married to their fellow Middlebury graduates, right? So like, we're not just admitting your chemistry grade, it's my job to help you choose a partner. So we better pick well for you, right? And so those sort of personality pieces. And so for me, the essay, who are you going to be in our community, and how can we help you become the best version of you that you are in the process of becoming? And so, absolutely, the academics are a major cornerstone, but beyond that, who are you? What makes you tick? Who are you going to be here? Who are you going to be when you're 59? And are you going to look back and say, my college really helped me to become the person that I am today? And so I think those sort of non-numerical, more personal, more esoteric, more goofy things that help us really see who you are beyond a particular number or beyond a resume. Please don't be shy about putting those things forward, because that's the most interesting stuff. And in the end,
Sam froze. And I'll pick on him a little bit and say, who would have known that Middlebury ended in Match.com? So Moses, you mentioned test optional, and you mentioned that, most everybody on this panel will remain test optional moving through at least the next applicant pool. But I'm curious, I feel like sometimes students don't believe me when I define test optional, so I'm putting it out there to you guys. Some of you have been test optional, some of you are moving in that direction. And by been test optional, I mean for a while. But what does test optional mean? How does a student decide if they should submit their test scores? And are you penalized for not submitting them? I think we have a pretty good idea from Moses about what might be used in place of a test score. But I'm curious to get your thoughts on the test optional piece.
Yeah, and again, I'll leave room for my colleagues to add, but test optional means exactly that. It is optional, and you're not disadvantaged by not submitting test scores. And what has been for UVM last year was our first time being test optional, and what I've been buoyed by is the fact that I think students are starting to figure out when to send test scores and when not. And I think that it comes down to, researching the schools that you're interested in and understanding what is a typical test score for an admitted student and trying to figure out where that falls in. I would suggest that for all of us, test scores have never been the end all be all of this process. It's always been this sort of secondary thing that we look at that more than anything sometimes can confirm or otherwise dispel what we're already seeing in all the other parts of the application that we're spending, frankly, more of our time on. So I think that, the decision about whether or not to send test scores is about the schools you're interested in, the scores that you have, and trying to make sure that you understand what a competitive score is for a given institution. But please know the takeaway is that students are not penalized I would say, I'll let my colleagues speak for themselves, but students are not penalized for not submitting test scores. Optional means exactly that if you choose to submit test scores, if you believe that it supports your candidacy, I encourage you to send those in. If not, don't feel as if that somehow disadvantages you in the evaluation process.
Anybody else have anything to add before I ask a follow-up? Moses, am I incorrect in my advice to students, which kind of is the best measure of who you are as a student is that longitudinal document, which is your transcript, versus a Saturday morning at 7:30. And as a result, colleges will spend far more time looking at your transcript and digging into that versus looking at I'm going to oversimplify it, at a simple number.
Yes, I would say that a standardized test score is not as a standalone predictor of success all that helpful to us. I would kind of harken back to what Sam said, that there are things in addition to your transcript that can really inform how we feel about your candidacy. So, the transcript isn't the end all be all either. There is no magic bullet, right? There is no one thing that is going to matter more than anything else. But a standardized test score has never been for us, and I imagine for my colleagues, this magic bullet that determines the success that you will have the rest of your life. It's a combination of factors to include your transcript, the curricular rigor, performance, but the things that Sam talked about earlier that sort of round out your application.
All right, next question. And I'm curious to get kind of everybody's thoughts on this, because I think it's just an interesting number for our students to kind of see, because it relates to the next question I'm going to ask, the follow-up question I'm going to ask. How many applications do you personally read each year? And I'm opening it up I'd like to hear from everybody.
I read a few hundred each year, just myself. It depends on which schools that I'm reading for, but easily a few hundred.
And how many, the second part of that question is, how many applications do you typically receive in a year? So you read a few hundred, how many might you receive at St. Lawrence in a year?
Like at St. Lawrence as a whole?
Yeah.
Last year we received about 5,200 applications.
Okay.
And so we read all of those. So I'll read between 350 and 500.
Bernita?
Well, I am actually fairly new to St. Mike's. I just started in August. And so some of those stats are not that clear to me. But in my first reading season, which was very interesting, probably close to 150 so far for me just this fall. And so I know that what I'm hearing mostly is how we have exceeded last year's applicants. And so I'm not actually clear yet on how many total we have read. So I'm sorry for not being able to have that particular number yet, but ask me next year.
Sam?
At Middlebury last year, we received 12,000 apps. This year, we're at about 13,000. And when you add it all up, I'll personally probably read close to 2,000. And I know that sounds like a big number, but I want your audience to know that admissions people do read every word of every application. And so if that means we do it 7 days a week, then that's what it means. But even when those numbers go high, I want you to hear me say every word gets read.
Brandon?
Oh, that's a great question, Russ. So this year alone, I think we're up. I personally have read over 350 applications so far. We probably at Castleton will read a total of about 3,000 applicants this year.
I'm guessing that's not your closet this year?
It's not. I'm actually at my office this year, Russ, which is very exciting. As you can see, I staged it for you.
Right.
I've moved out of the closet and they let me back in the office. So
cool. Last year, Brandon was coming to us from his closet, and his camera was sideways. It was really fun. Diane.
Yeah, so at Champlain last year, we got 6,200 applications. This year, we're at 6,400 already, but our app deadline hasn't passed yet. So as of this morning, my counselors had read between 500 and 600 files each. I do second read. So to echo what Sam was saying, as director of admissions, sometimes not only does one person look at your file, but they'll pass it off to a director or a secondary reader. So I do the secondary review of applications, and I've crossed 1,800 already this year. So those are much quicker. They're much faster to go through. You're reviewing some already analyzed information, but just to get that context that everything is reviewed, sometimes by multiple people, to make sure we're removing bias and really looking at every part of that application.
And Moses?
And if I could I jump in just real quick? So of course I had to text my director, Mike, to do justice here. So we're up last year, if anyone asked, and we've done so far about 2,000.
Cool. Tell Mike I said thank you.
I will.
Moses?
So we last year received around 25,500 applications. The interesting thing, given the audience, to keep in mind is only about 8% of those applications came from an actual Vermont resident. As you all know, Vermont is a small state, so our Vermont students get extra care in the process. This year I think will be around 30,000 applications, of which about 5.5% are going to be from a Vermont student. And I personally am not charged with doing a lot of the first reads. I'm involved in the decision making of a couple, few thousand applications, but our heavy readers will read around 1,300 applications, and it's important to recognize that it's sort of economy of scale. So we have an office of over 50 people. So for I think as Sam said and others. Each student gets the care that you would expect and hope that an office would give you. And so every application is being read and then going through a staged approach to decision making, such that no student who's denied admissions is only going to have one set of eyeballs on their application.
And the follow-up question is a big one for us in our office, because Sarah and I have done this for a number of years, and we've had a lot of feedback. And when we could have reps come in, it was always something that they wanted to talk to us about. But who do you like to see letters of rec from, and how many should a student get? And do you like or dislike when a student sends more than the requested number? Because we always have students talking about, 2 or 3 teachers and somebody, their boss, and then a clergyman, and it just kind of expands. And I had a rep, one year come in and tell me that a student submitted 28 letters of recommendation. I don't personally know 28 people that I'd want to ask to write a letter of recommendation, but we try and be sensitive in our office to what's happening with you guys, which is kind of why I asked numbers. But I'm curious, who do you want to see letters of rec from? How many should a student get? And how do you feel about a student who submits a lot?
So St. Mike's typically likes 2 recommendations, one from a counselor and one from a teacher, but we also value recommendations from a supervisor, a boss, someone that a student has served under and trusts, and that student feels like this person knows them really well. And I think that's such a fantastic thing in terms of being able to have someone speak for you. It could be a previous teacher, could be a Boy Scout leader, or someone where you've volunteered. So we typically like 2, but we've had students who submit 3 or 4, especially from specific teachers as well. So yeah, that's what we're looking for.
Seems like 2 to 4 is a good
kind
number.
of ideal. Yeah. I will jump in and say just check on the websites of schools that you're applying to, because rec requirements can vary a little bit. Like at St. Lawrence, we require 2 letters of recommendation from teachers that have taught you in the classroom, plus that counselor recommendation. And we do that because we like to really get a full picture of who you are as a student. And then, just like Bernita said, we appreciate letters of recommendation from people you've worked for that know you really well, that can speak to you and who you are in a different way.
But don't send 28.
But don't send 28.
I'm curious, we talked a little bit earlier about rigorous course load, and that kind of differs from student to student. So if a couple of you would like to speak to how you read a student's transcript and define a rigorous course load on a student by student basis, which I realize that question may be almost impossible to answer, but that's something we talk to our students about is, we're coming up on the add drop, or we're finishing the add drop process and getting permission to drop a class because we don't want it to impact an admissions decision, because sometimes what a student is taking is part of that rigorous course load. So how do you review a student's transcript and define rigorous course load for individual students? Sam, your hand is up.
My quick answer to that would be, we advise students to take the most advanced classes available to them that they also want to take. So if you're not a chemistry nut, then don't take AP chemistry. If that's not your thing, that's okay. But generally, the most advanced classes that you can take that you also want to take. I also want the audience out there to know that we do not compare schools to school, that's apples to oranges, right? So here in Middlebury, our local high school is an IB school. We're not going to sit there and compare a Middlebury Union kid to a CVU kid and say, well, the Middlebury Union kid had the full IB and the CVU kid did not. And so we also, I would say, the most advanced courses available to you that you want to take, and all of that is based on what your specific school offers. We are not in the business of comparing your school and its offerings to another school.
Can I ask you a follow-up question, Sam? And then we'll let other people ask about or chime in about the rigorous course load. What do you all do with weighted versus unweighted GPAs?
I like a weighted GPA because that allows the school to determine the weight of its own curriculum and how to represent that. So personally, I tell any school that asks me for advice to use a weighted GPA. If a school does not, that's fine. We have to, we're happy to assess the rigor ourselves. We will not recalculate your GPA and add weight to it. But I deal with a lot of schools that do not weight their GPA. So it's just, you just have to trust that I know what I'm doing, right? So that the straight A student who last year took 2 courses, one of them was called the alphabet and one of them was called walking for fitness, right? That student is not the better student than the kid who took, a whole bunch of very challenging classes and maybe got some B's. And so, we just trust me, we know how to do that. And we certainly will assess rigor on our end if it is not weighted.
All right. How do a few others review rigor?
I think so for Castleton, we're a small public institution, and as far as academic rigor goes, we're looking for students very similar to what Middlebury, how they review, take the most challenging courses that you are able to. I think I talk a lot of with students and families about building their admissions team when they're going through the admission process. And their admissions team is your school counselor, your teachers, your admission counselors, and talk to all of those people. And, I always like to lean on the experts in their field. So, ask your school counselor, what type of courses should I be taking? I'm interested in this school. How can I prepare myself? The sooner you can ask those questions, the stronger you'll be for success, I think. But Castleton is a school where, our acceptance rate is about 85%. So we're not necessarily looking for a straight A student. We're looking for students that have challenged themselves academically with, strong college prep work all 4 years. I think for the minimum for all of us is, you need to meet those high school graduation requirements. So if you're thinking about add drop, don't drop that 4th year math class if that's something that you need to graduate, or English, stick with that. But if you are really struggling in an AP class and want to move down to an honors level or a college prep level course, that's appropriate. Another level of rigor that Castleton and the other Vermont State colleges really value is early college and dual enrollment. So if you have the opportunity to take a community college coursework or a college course while you're in high school, that's the equivalent of taking an AP course. So we really value that rigor and that challenge as well.
The other thing I'd add is that I've worked at a couple different schools that have very different and drastically different acceptance rates, right? And no matter where I've worked, we're looking at trends as well as rigor in what you're taking. So we want to see that you're challenging yourself. And as Brandon said, we want to see that you're hitting those milestones and that you are getting all of your graduation requirements in. But if you're dialing it in your senior year, we're going to be able to tell that too, right? So as Sam was saying, we read a lot of these applications. We already went over the numbers we're reading. If you're taking only 2 real classes your senior year and some other fluff classes, what that says to me anyway, no matter what school I'm working at, is this student going to be ready when they jump into a full course load of college classes next year? So you want to be showing that you've not only progressed over 4 years, but you're ready to go, right? Like you're not taking the training wheels off, you're training, you're going in and you're going into college. That's the goal. So we want to get you in your academic stride, not when you're backing off that. So take classes that are a healthy challenge for you, that you think that you're going to enjoy, that you think that you're going to do well at, but might be a challenge, and you'll be okay. We want to see you pushing yourselves, not, jumping into the deep end if you can't swim, but we want to see you pushing yourselves and really being ready for the rigors of college when you arrive, no matter what college you go to.
I think also that it's important to recognize that we recognize improvement. So if you struggled in the 9th grade or struggled in the beginning of 10th, but you have improved, you've really buckled down, and by 12th grade, you really have strengthened your grades. That's important too, and to value that hard work that you've done, especially through the COVID year, where many students were remote and had a hard time doing the work and getting into class. But when you show that determination and you've improved and worked hard, and putting that in the essay and telling us what that was like for you. I look for that in the essays, just what happened during that year. And if your grades dipped, maybe it was because life was hard and things were difficult. So I think it's important to point out that so much has gone on in our country, and those showing just your ability to press through and to work hard, and showing us that in your senior year is just as important.
I have 3 essay questions, but I'm going to save them to the end when we hear the student voice about the essays. But I have a couple others that I think I want to get to before we open it up to questions from our audience on YouTube. And if you do have questions, dump them in the YouTube chat, and Sarah will kind of log them and then come in, and she and I will swap places, and she can ask the audience questions. But and I may be putting some of you on the spot, but here at CVU, we're seeing, and I would imagine you have to see this as well, we're seeing an increase in students identifying with anxiety or some other mental health need. What supports are on campus for incoming freshmen with an identified need? Nobody's jumping at answering the question. So
I would be happy to jump in, Russ. At Castleton, we have a lot of support for students. The world has kind of been flipped upside down and then flipped upside down again. And, I think, one thing that I always like to commend this generation of student is that you are a resilient generation. You have made it through high school. You've made it through some major milestones that are challenging in a perfect scenario. And this past couple of years have been anything but perfect. And we understand that, and many colleges and universities do. One thing we've certainly done since the pandemic has gone on is we've really increased our support services for students, whether that be academic support, in the classroom space and also online. Technology supports, mental health support services, all sorts of support services have really been increased. And a lot of institutions have received a lot of funds to make sure that students are going to be successful. And I think that's a conversation that our student success team has had in great detail, and they've revisited again, and they've evaluated and tried to, reassess and adjust in the best way possible to support students. It's a tough time, and we understand that. And I think, the thing to keep in mind is don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to ask questions and seek out that, because so many people on all of our campuses and in our communities are here to help you. And it's okay to ask for that help, and nothing, and don't feel shame in that or anything at all.
Anybody have anything? Oh, Moses, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I trust that exists at all schools. I mean, you know, UVM has the Center for Health and Wellbeing, which is a sort of overarching department on campus that spans a lot of different things. It could be wellness, nutrition, it could be mindfulness and mentorship. But included within that is the Counseling and Psychiatric Services Office, and you know, they cover a range of services that, you know, I think, again, all of us are going to be able to provide, whether that's phone triage, individual counseling, group counseling, psychiatric referrals, case management, you know, drop-in hours. So I mean, the support services are extensive, and I trust that's true of all my colleagues' institutions, because, you know, as Brandon mentioned, this is not something that is, you know, unique to this moment. I think that one of the things that's great is this recognition that, you know, all of us come to mental health from a different angle, and all of us need various levels of support. And so I think it's is the duty of us as institutions of higher education to provide that support. And so I think that, you know, it's really something that the UVM prides itself on. I think it's something that we're well known for, but I think that it's something that all of our institutions are committed to, recognizing that the success of our students is our own success. Those students who don't retain, many times the number one reason is mental health. Those students that don't graduate on time in 4 years, oftentimes it is mental health. And so, you know, it's in all of our shared interests to ensure the success of students. And one of the ways that we do that, we being the collective represented here this evening, is through the support of students in their mental well-being.
All right. I get asked this question every year, and I think it's important to have you guys respond to it, but are there instances where you would entertain waiving admissions requirements if a student's 504 or IEP excuses them for certain classes? I'm thinking specifically of world language classes. And to that same end, are things like American Sign Language considered a world language?
I'm actually going to be curious if my fellow panelists have a similar answer on this one. At Middlebury, we do not have admissions requirements per se. So there is no list of courses that we demand that a high school student take. We want you to have fulfilled your high school's requirements. And, you know, that's it. But beyond that, it's not really our, you know, we're going to look at your rigor and so forth. And so it's helpful for me to know if you dropped French after French 1 in 9th grade. It's certainly helpful to know that you have, you know, perhaps a learning difference and an accommodation for that learning difference that excused you from that language requirement at your school. But there is no list of specific courses that we are looking to make sure you've taken. We go by your school and your situation.
Yeah, I would echo, sorry, I would echo what Sam said. We don't have at St. Lawrence specific classes, but we do, you know, have kind of an outline of what we'd like to see, you know, 4 years of English, math, and science, some social science and some world language. But we also recognize that every student's academic path is different. And that depends on, you know, every student's personal situation, whether that's a 504 plan that exempts them from world language or whatever the circumstance might be, if they go to a technical school or something like that. But we definitely look at what you've done over your 4 years and like to see consistency in especially math, science, and English. And I personally would count American Sign Language as a foreign language.
I wanted to go back to something our colleague Moses said earlier, which is that at many colleges and universities, there's a couple thresholds. They're right. Can you do the work? Can you be the successful? And then are you competitive in the applicant pool? And I think that's something that students really need to think about. If you're not taking one specific class for whatever reason, what are you replacing that class with, right? The more competitive, the higher you're swinging in the admissions game, the more competitive schools you're applying to, the harder the competition is going to be in those pools, right? So, well, it certainly is understandable, and people will look holistically at your application and what you're taking. Remember that you may be surrounded by students who are taking 5 main core academic classes every year. So you want to make sure that you keep yourselves competitive for the pool that you're in. And that's really important. And that's where, going back to Brandon, what he said about your team, right? Talking with your admissions counselor, talking with your counselor for the competitiveness of the pool I want to be in. What type of classes do I need to be taking? If I'm not in the right level for me, what's another set of schools I could apply to that might be right, where I would be competitive? And I think really thinking about that too, all of us are going to take accommodations into account to some extent, but know that all of us, you heard how many applications we're all reviewing. There's going to be a lot of competition in there. Just because you're qualified for a school doesn't mean you'll necessarily be admitted to that school. And that's a tough thing too, sometimes to hear.
I'll only chime in because it perhaps as an outlier on this panel, we do have specific courses that students are required to take depending on the major they're applying to. We have university-wide entrance requirements related to coursework you needed to have taken in high school. Those are set by the faculty senate to include world language, 2 years of, at least 2 years of the same world language. We do include American Sign Language in that. But it goes beyond that. When you apply to the university, you apply to one of our 7 schools and colleges, and each of those will have different entrance requirements. If you want to be a nurse and you've never taken chemistry, our faculty senate is determined you're not eligible. Same as an example, engineering. You know, if you haven't at least taken pre-calculus, you're not eligible for the College of Engineering and Mathematical Sciences. So each school will be different. Each institution, I should say, will be different. And the key takeaway, I think, for a lot of the questions we're being asked is do your research. Look at the schools that you're interested in that are on your list and see what they require and what they are valuing or looking at in their admissions process.
All right, now for some fun ones. And Moses, you don't have to answer this one if you don't want, but this is related to a conversation that you and I had last spring, and it has to do with the essay and specifically risky essays. I had a student who wrote, I thought was a really excellent essay and very intentionally used the F word in the essay. And we had Moses and I had a conversation about whether or not it was an essay that should be submitted. Student ultimately chose to submit it. Student ultimately was accepted, but I'm curious how you all feel about essays that take some of those risks and may use, I'm gonna say offensive language, but perhaps it's appropriate in the essay.
You know, I'd love to hear from like colleagues to be frank about this. I think you have to be careful with an essay because you don't know who's reading it. And if oftentimes I'll read essays where I feel like a student is trying to just to be shocking for the sake of being shocking. I think the essay is a lot of pressure for students. It's the part of the application that they have to create. And I recognize that can be difficult. And I think that sometimes students overthink that and they try to, or they do things for the sake of trying to stand out that may not be in their best interest. So, you know, you have to be careful about trying to be authentic in an essay, while at the same time recognizing that you don't know who the committee members are and how they are evaluating your candidacy. And it can be a dangerous road to go down. You know, some of the finest candidates I've seen have had some essays that were edgy, but you don't want to be edgy for the sake of being edgy or controversial just because you think it will help you stand out in an applicant pool. It's a tightrope I wouldn't walk myself, but I'd love to hear, frankly, from my colleagues about their thoughts on this.
I think really like what Moses said, where, you know, be intentional with your essay. It can be, the essay is like this big looming task or project that students have. They feel like, oh my gosh, these 250 words to 650 words are going to make or break who I am in this admission committee. And it is pretty reflective. And we really take our time when we review our applications. I think if you're a naturally funny person, you can add some humor. But if you're going to try really hard to put jokes into your essay and they don't really flow with your personality, I wouldn't force anything. Be as natural as you can in the essay. Now, I also have read some applications and essays where students were maybe a little bit too natural and too comfortable. And, another thing, this kind of actually also, I think, goes back to, the question that you asked earlier, Russ, about mental health and anxiety and sharing. Students, this year's class in particular, I've noticed the trend that students feel very comfortable to share their vulnerability. And I can be very appreciative of that and very empathetic, but it's challenging. I know firsthand that high school students are having a very, very hard time because they've shared it with us. And I think the essay is a very vulnerable place to be, but do remember that your admission counselors and admission committees are made up of humans too. It can be very jarring and very emotionally challenging to read essays that are very open and very honest. So I think, there is that balance of sharing your story, but not, maybe not sharing everything in your story.
Sam, you were going to jump in. No, changing your mind.
I have nothing that is important enough to add that I'll waste your time.
Can I say something just quickly?
Yep.
Sam's stealing his time. I would say, so I'm coming up on 20 years of reading application essays, which is a lot of application essays, right? And you see kind of trends. I'm looking at Moses and Sam. We've been in this field a while, right? I mean, you kind of see some trends come and go. One thing that I always challenge students to do is think of your essay as this is our insight to you. This is the one time we get to hear your voice, right? Speaking to us in your application. Other people are talking about you, your accomplishments. This is your voice. When I read the essay, if I sit down, if I go over there and I make dinner, right? And I come back and I'm reflecting and I'm like, what do I remember about that student? I read his essay, Sam Prouty. What do I remember about him? Half an hour later, the next day, what do you want me to remember about you? The struggle that you had this year and how hard it's been and that you're really, really struggling. Okay, I understand that. And I know that's going on right now. Or did you interject into that essay how you're going to come through this, how you're going to thrive, how you're going to learn from what you're going through? So when you close a book and you think what did I remember about it? When you close an essay, what did I remember about it? If you're describing a challenge or something you've persevered through, that's okay. And I applaud you for doing that in your essay. Make sure that 80% of your essay isn't about the struggle. And there's only one sentence at the end that says you're going to be okay, right? I want to hear what you're going through. And I want to get the message at the end that you're okay. Save enough room in your essay to talk about what you've learned, what you're going to bring to campus, how you're going to persevere. So that's what we remember, right? And so I think I just challenge people, have someone read your essay, walk away, and 2 days later say, what did you remember about it, right? Because that's what you want the admissions counselor to close that's how old I am. I'm saying close the file. It's all online now. You want them to close the file and you want them to remember, right? What it was that they read about you, what they learned about you, and have it be positive.
And the reason I ask is because one of the things, and for the families that are online or will watch this later, is our juniors take writing pros. And in that class, the teachers help every single student work through that college essay. And so we go in and we help them start. And I think you have a wide range of students who either put in the effort or don't. And it's always good to get some thoughts on the essay and kind of what it means. And we do have a couple questions from the stream. So I'm going to put my mask on, go get Sarah, let Sarah come in here and ask you guys the questions from the stream. And then she's going to cue Gary to play the videos, which cues you guys to go into your group chats. And I can't thank you enough for being here. It's actually a panel and a night that Sarah and I look forward to every year, because every year I learn a little something more that helps me be better at my job. And I think it helps my students produce better applications and be better consumers of the process. So thank you all for being here. I know it's an hour out of your time that I'm very grateful to you all for having done. So thank you. I'm going to bring Sarah in, and we'll see you all later. Maybe I'll bring Sarah in. She's still behind closed doors.
Does anyone want to sing anything? Now's the time. Sam, do you sing?
Not in a way that would keep you interested. I read one today. We were talking about essays. I read one today about Pickles the horse. I love riding Pickles the horse. Pickles the horse is my best friend. I don't know what I would ever do if I couldn't have Pickles the horse in my life, you know. And so just to kind of capitalize on what was already said, a good day is if I laugh out loud at least once, I cry at least once, I think new thoughts at least once. And so if you're writing an essay that just tells us something that we would otherwise know, then skip that one and move on to the next one. And yeah, think about the human being on the other end of that. And are you keeping their interest? Are you unveiling something about yourself that they would not otherwise know? Are you going to make them think or laugh or cry or see the world through your eyes? And those are the good ones. Sarah, we were just killing time waiting for you to come in here and star in the show. So I talked Diane off of the ledge of singing a song.
All right. Hi. Can you hear me? Yeah. Yes. Okay, great. Thank you everyone for your thoughtful responses. We do have a few questions from families, and I wanted to put those out there right now. The first question is, and I think we covered a little bit of this in the presentation, but I'm going to ask these questions. Do transcripts show as proficiency based? How do universities view the transcript?
We get this question a lot from Vermont, and we get it from other places. We know how to read transcripts. Sometimes they say A, B, C. Sometimes they say 80, 90, 100. Sometimes a school does not have a transcript and they send us 104 pages of written evaluations. Sometimes the school uses smiley faces and sunshines and clouds and rain. You know, that we've seen everything. And so what are we looking for in a transcript? We're looking for some indication of what your performance has been based on the scale that your school uses to determine that success. And so a proficiency transcript tells us all the same things that a letter grade transcript tells us. What are the courses you've taken? What is your rigor? And relative to the scale at your school, where has your performance landed? And so I know there's a lot of anxiety about proficiency here in Vermont now that that's kind of a new thing. But the truth is, you know, we read all kinds of transcripts and they all essentially tell us the same thing. And you know, we know how to do that. We know how to sort of train our eyes to look for what we want to look for in those transcripts. So, you know, Sarah, if you want to switch and use happy faces for success and frowny faces for not very successful, we'll figure that out too.
Anyone else want to chime in? I think that does cover it quite well. Okay. Next question. In addition to not having weighted GPA, my understanding is CVU also does not report class ranking. Is this correct? And how do colleges view this lack of insight into the performance of the student? So I will say, no, we do not weight GPA, and we do not report class rank either. Curious what you would say about this.
I would say that a lot of high schools have gone away from reporting ranking. I'm curious what my other colleagues say, but I know a lot of I read a lot of Vermont applications, and most Vermont high schools don't rank anymore. And, you know, as for across the country too, that seems to be the trend.
It's kind of like when you don't submit scores to a test optional school. It's just a piece that we don't have, and we have other things that we look at in our holistic review to get a sense of who you are as a student and as a person. So it's just a piece of the puzzle that we don't have and we don't necessarily need.
I would just add for comfort, you know, we stopped, in fact, even recording rank in our review process a few years ago because the percent of schools submitting it dropped below 30%. So, I mean, that's literally how few schools provide rank.
Great, thanks. Since schools are becoming test optional, is it safe to assume that a student could choose to not take the SAT or ACT this year?
I think this goes back to what I'm going to harp on all night is that admissions team and do your research. I think if you're going to apply to schools that are not going to require test scores, you don't need to take the test. But if you do some more research after you've applied to a list of schools and then find your dream school and they require SAT scores, you might have wished that you had SAT scores to submit. So I think, you know, as of right now, Castleton and the Vermont State Colleges are, you know, we're moving in that direction of test optional. But this has been only the second year that Castleton has been test optional, you know, before we required them. And our peer institutions at the Vermont State Colleges, some of them required them and some of them didn't. So I think some schools, you know, we might go back to it, or certain academic programs, I guess more specifically, might go back to requiring test scores. Like nursing, for example, that's been an area that our faculty assembly has asked about adding SAT scores as a requirement for nursing applicants, or maybe more selective programs. So, you know, I think while the SAT are not the end all be all, it sometimes is a nice thing to have in your back pocket.
So St. Mike's has been test optional since 2009, and we plan to stay that way. We'll not go back to that. And we always tell our students, you know, if they really feel that the SAT gives a better picture of their academic abilities, to go ahead and certainly submit it. But if they don't want to, it doesn't work against them. It was, I think, discussed earlier this evening. So I think that that's something that, you know, we look at, but it does not determine at the end whether you are admitted or not. We are looking at the whole picture. We are holistic as well in terms of looking at the grades, looking at your essay, but something very, very important, I just want to point this out about for St. Mike's, is what you're doing outside of school. The extracurricular is very important to us. The community service, what you've been involved in, sports, your even caring for people in your family is important to St. Michael's. They look at that. If you take care of younger siblings or a grandparent, we value that very strongly. So we look at that as well in terms of personal qualities. So that's something that we really review.
I just wanted to echo what Brandon said. I mean, we'll remain test optional at Champlain. We have been, but we're speaking mostly to juniors and underclassmen right now. And I don't know what the future will hold. You know, I'm pretty active regionally and nationally on some boards, and we're talking about what's going to happen. And unless taking the SATs is going to cause you an incredible amount of distress. If it is, don't do it. Don't cause yourself an amount of distress. But if you can take the SATs, if you can sit for it, it's low stakes right now. You might not need it next year. Many colleges have already announced that they're not requiring them for next year. You might surprise yourself when you're relaxed and you take the SATs, you might do pretty darn well. And if you get the SATs back and you say, whoa, that's not the score I wanted, then who cares? Maybe you don't have to submit them next year, right? That's when you say, forget it. I'm not going to submit them to UVM or wherever else. If you get them back and you say, wow, that looks pretty good. That reflects my academic abilities and what I think I can do. Then you do submit them where you're going, right? So I think it just opens more options and doors for you, and you don't have to use them. There's very, very few schools out there. There's under a handful of them that require you to submit all the tests you're taking. Talk to your counselor if you're one of those, but those are even going away right now, right? So, I mean, I think like you've got a lot of options right now, and it's one more tool in your toolkit if you can take it.
Okay, last question. I've heard that many high school graduates defer their pursuit of undergraduate college because of COVID. Are you seeing an increase in students who have taken a gap year in this year's applicant pool?
No is the short answer. We saw in our case at Middlebury, we saw that last year, but not this year. And so the current first year class at Middlebury had probably 75 kids in it who took a gap year. And for us, the normal number is maybe 25. But moving ahead, we're not necessarily, I think the initial shock of living through COVID has happened. And obviously, if you want to take a gap year, we support that. I'll plug Middlebury's unique FEB program. Ask me later. But generally, colleges have figured out how to be in session even in a COVID world. And so we have not seen as much of that now. But last year, there was a spike in that, I think, across many institutions.
Ditto.
I think going along the lines of gap years, I was speaking to another one of my colleagues on another panel, and they mentioned how if you're going to do a gap year, make it an intentional gap year. Really think about, taking advantage of a program, or if you're going to travel with some intention. If you're going to work, prepare to go on to college if that is your ultimate goal. I think as we all have experienced, I still think it's 2019 and we're in 2022. Life happens and it moves by so quickly. And so if you take a gap year could turn into a gap 5, and then it's even more challenging to go back to school. So I think, but if you give yourself that year to travel, to save up money, to, experience something unique, do that, but really do it with some intention. That's one thing that I always ask my applicants if they are coming off of a gap year, or if they say, hey, I want to defer my acceptance, I want to take a gap year. The follow-up question I have is, what is your plan for that gap year? And how are you going to use that to the best of your ability? So I think that's something to strongly consider when you're thinking about a gap year.
And because I know this may not be obvious to everyone, my strong recommendation is that you apply to colleges in your senior year of high school. You get admitted to colleges, and then you tell them, hey, I've been admitted, I want to take a gap year, and work through their process of deferral. It happens sometimes, but I would not recommend graduating from high school, going off and doing something for a year, and then trying to apply to colleges. Do this your senior year while you have your support network there to help you do that, and then defer is my recommendation. And I'm getting other nods.
I really agree with that because I have noticed just in reading applications that it's just harder to get sometimes those school reports, harder to get those particular teachers. They can still happen, but I totally agree. Applying in your senior year where everybody knows you so well, everything is fresh, it does help quite a bit to do it that way. Absolutely.
Great. Thank you so much for your expert words of advice. And we just really appreciate all of you being here for this. At this point, we are going to have a brief video played with the same students who spoke at the beginning, sharing just some information about their essay. So that part of the application. And right after that, you'll have the opportunity to connect with some of the colleges if you wish to. So you should see the Zoom link on the right side of your screen or below your screen for the different colleges. And they're all offering breakout sessions so that you could just ask specific questions about their college or anything that you didn't have a chance to ask now. So thank you so much for being part of this evening, and please feel free to reach out to your school counselor or if you have any additional thoughts, and we will be meeting with your students individually to be going over part of the application process.
Bye, everyone. Be well.
Thanks, everyone.
So I wrote about books and stories and their influence and impact on my life. I've been a reader forever, and it's just been an important thing, like every grade I've been in at every point in my life. And so I chose that topic just because it was like a universal common thread that I've always had.
The topic was donating blood and volunteering with the Red Cross, actually. It was a little bit of a strange topic. But then kind of the deeper theme of it, you could say, was like finding a passion and finding somewhere that I could fit in and not feel that I was changing myself to fit in. And then when it came to writing it, I knew that I needed to find that deeper meaning and really figure out a way to express who I am through it rather than just, you know, tell a story. I think that was my biggest issue, was writing it as more of a narrative rather than kind of like an about me. So I had to really edit it and take out a lot of the storytelling elements and get to like the meaning, because it is only 650 words and it's really difficult to kind of express yourself in that. So I think like kind of advice that goes along with that is don't think that you have to share everything about yourself. It's much easier and much better to just kind of focus on one thing and really go deep with that rather than just kind of giving like a broad story of your life or something like that.
What I noticed about my essay, I think, and I did this in, it was a process of writing prose, but I had a bunch of topics and I found that I could not, it was really hard for me to get past the first paragraph for most essays. And this was the only essay that I wrote that wasn't an issue, and I actually had too much. So my essay topic, the prompt, I eventually assigned mine. I did the prompt afterwards. I kind of wrote my essay and then assigned a prompt, was discussing an accomplishment, event, or realization that sparked a period of personal growth for me. And it was about an experience I had my sophomore year that kind of challenged my confidence and my self-esteem. And then I talk about that experience and then how since sophomore year and the leadership experiences I've had on teams and part of groups, how I've changed in a lot of ways, and how other people have helped me change. So other leaders that I admire, as well as how I try to kind of be the same and give back to other people. So that's kind of my topic.
What piece of advice would you, or multiple if you have them, would you give to our rising seniors as they kind of embark on this path for this time?
I think the first thing would be to have a college essay done before fall, or at least mostly done. I had mine written from writing prose, and I really only had to edit it down. So that was a huge help, especially senior fall can be pretty stressful already, especially if you play sports and stuff like that. So I think that having that done was really helpful.
Just knowing when all the dates are for the schools. I think setting dates also for like when you want to have your essay done, when you want to have, you know, the list of extracurriculars done, when you want to talk to teachers about letters of recommendations. Like, it's really good to write those down and have a plan, just so it doesn't get crazy, and for your own peace of mind. And because even though it is like your college application, it really is like a unified effort, I felt, with the school counselor and with the teacher recommendations and just everything that goes in. It's a lot more than just one person. And so making sure that everything is set and organized is really important.
I think that it's really important from the time that you start making your list, whether you've started making your list when you were in middle school or if you've just started, to the time that you actually apply, to be willing to like change your opinions and understand that something that you thought might be a good fit for you is no longer a good fit, or, you know, maybe you had a dream school that you were set on since you were little, and then you visit it and you're not happy with it or something like that. I think it's really important to be open to that.
It's so daunting to be like at the very beginning of this all and to like look forward and see like all the things and all the hurdles that have to be crossed, but it'll pass, and at the end your hard work will pay off. I think that's my advice.